Calling all film fanatics and culture lovers, it's showtime. Cultures and Communities Fest is coming soon, both virtually and in person, to a movie palace near you. CCF features a full week of candid conversations, moving pictures, and unforgettable events, all focused on holistic health and social wellness. Come celebrate culture with your community this September 6th through the 12th. Go to mkefilm.org/CCF for more information.
Hello and welcome to the 2021 Cultures and Community Festival presented by Freighter and the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm Ernie Quiroz, Citizen Fronteras program with Milwaukee Film. I am thrilled, excited, and honored to be welcoming the director of the film Stateless for this Q&A. Michèle Stephenson, thank you so much for joining us. And actually, before we get started, I do have to say that the Citizen Fronteras program, we will also be continuing some programming, some Hispanic programming for Hispanic Heritage Month, which is starting by the time you're watching this, we'll be starting in about a week, September 15th. We're going to have a whole bunch of programming for Hispanic Heritage Month, and we're also going to be looking at more films that sort of exist in this intersection between Hispanic culture and Black culture, and looking at sort of this Afro-Latinx intersection. But I'm excited to sort of start that conversation with this film, Stateless, and some of the issues that exist at that racial intersection. So Michèle, thank you so much for joining us in presenting this Q&A in this film.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be in conversation.
Yeah. Before we get started, so you are of Haitian descent. I think we should acknowledge sort of the tragedies that are going on in Haiti right now. We'd be remiss if we didn't with, just the earthquake and then obviously COVID hugely impacting the island. The assassination of the president. Just terrible things happening. Besides the film, have you had any contact with people in Haiti? What is it like right now over there?
Well, the information that I have, I'm on my WhatsApp with my cousins. We have a few family WhatsApp platforms and groups that we're constantly in touch and connection with. And the one thing that these tragedies do is bring us closer, friends and family closer. It's sort of the silver lining in these things in terms of being able to reconnect with people and be in close communion and connection. And my family is for the most part in Port-au-Prince, and so we were not affected, my direct family. But it's sort of hard to unpack all of this it's so important to understand history and the history of the island, the history of Haiti, and how it has challenged. It has been sort of this sore thumb at the foot of white supremacy on so many ways, challenging the status quo and the way we see things, and racial capitalism on so many levels. But it's also been has suffered from being at that spot. So for me, there were a lot of sort of moments of it triggered some PTSD, and I'm sure for those on the island even more, from the 2010 earthquake. I actually traveled down to Haiti 10 weeks after the earthquake, which actually connects a little bit with the work that I did with Stateless, to document Haitians helping other Haitians in Haiti at the earthquake, because there was a long time before international aid came. And when it did come, as we know the history, it's quite controversial, and in some ways sort of worsened things. There's a lot of things that did not get better, as we know. And so it was really important to shed a light on Haitians, the mutual aid that was happening there, and Dominicans who were coming to the island. But the trauma of being there and experiencing the aftershocks and seeing sort of, for me, things that I remember from my childhood and growing up completely destroyed. So does this part of our collective memory being destroyed? I can only imagine how difficult it is now for those on that part of on that peninsula. But one thing I did hear, which was sort of heartening is that because it didn't hit Port-au-Prince, that people felt it, but there was no sort of major damage. There is a part of the country that can go to the assistance of the folks on the peninsula. So what you're seeing is, a movement of mutual aid among Haitians. Back in the day, back in 2010, it was Port-au-Prince was the heart, the heart of the nervous system of the country. So when that collapsed, it was hard to have that internal sort of mutual aid. But now, because it is in the peninsula, we do see some assistance and support coming from other parts of the country and from Port-au-Prince. And I hope that continues, because I think, if anything, and I think there's a larger level of consciousness happening where we don't want to repeat the mistakes of 11 years ago. And that have to do with international assistance, the disaster industrial complex, disaster tourism, and I'm hoping that the voices that challenge that will be heard in a much more forceful way. So that's sort of a bit of the silver lining that we're thinking about. And I think one thing that I'd like to just say, sorry, I'm sorry, going off a little bit, but to be very careful in terms of thinking about who you're sending support to. That really it's those that are on the ground most affected, that know what's going on, to do our homework when we're providing aid and support. And really in that way, we understand that aid is not necessarily about me feeling better about myself because I gave something, but really knowing where is my support going and how is it helping. And there were a lot of organizations that profited off of the earthquake, and all these sort of text SMSs that were going on, and even telethons and all kinds of things. So I'm just encouraging the audience out there. This is a long haul in terms of the rehabilitation. We can send things today, but there is the long reconstruction that is happening, and to really think about where you're sending your support to.
I want to there's definitely, you need to do your research of who you're supporting and how you're doing that. And it's not, it's not just this one event, this one time, and let's forget about Haiti and not, but not to put you on the spot, but are there any, if people did want to help, if people sort of felt that need, are there any resources that you would recommend, or any, what's the best way to do that?
I think one of the organizations that I'm closely tied with, actually, they even supported our film Stateless, is FOCAL, F-O-K-A-L. And they have a direct line. It's a foundation that's based in Haiti. It's a Haitian-run foundation in Haiti that has direct line and access and channels to the grassroots organizations on the ground that are doing the work there. So I would definitely start with their website. I think it's focal.org, F-O-K-A-L. And they're very reputable, and that's who I've been sort of indicating to people who have reached out about supporting.
Okay. Well, thank you for that information, and hopefully that'll help people who want to give, but want to be effective in their giving. So let's talk about this movie, and obviously you being from Haiti, and sort of what was the genesis. Obviously these are long-standing issues. This is a long thing coming, and sadly, issues of white supremacy and racism, not anything specific to Haiti, but this seemed to be this rise of nationalism and white supremacy that's going on throughout the world, sort of in the last 5 to 10 years. And then with the passage of the law, with the Supreme Court ruling, but talk about just the genesis of the film and sort of the issues that were swirling around that made you decide, okay, I need to make a film about this.
Sure. Well, there are a couple of things that I sort of wanted to point out that come from a very personal space. Yes, I am of Haitian descent. I was born in Haiti. My father is Haitian. My mother is Panamanian, so I've also sort of lived in the communities that intersect between Haiti, Panama, the Caribbean, but also Latinx identity and culture. And firsthand experiencing how anti-Blackness plays out, within family members, both, Panamanian and Haitian and Caribbean. And I feel like for me, it was very important to shed light how anti-Blackness sort of plays out within our Latinx communities. That the Dominican Republic, while it's sort of its way of acting that is state sanctioned, right? While extreme, is not an anomaly in terms of our attitudes all over Latin America around what it means to be Black. This idea of mejorar la raza, to better the race, permeates not just the DR, but other parts of the hemisphere, including in the United States. So, and it's something that I heard growing up and that I feel is really important to sort of unpack and expose. So that's on the side of the Latinx side of my multiple identities that I really felt compelled, especially understanding the experiences that my family and I have been through in North America and looking at how systemic racism plays out here and our sort of role within that. And then on the Haitian side, I grew up being exposed to both the Dominican and Haitian culture, grew up around the music. I have family members that have lived in the DR. Some extended family have actually, married Dominicans. So I had that close rapport culturally, family-wise, but also historically, I have a family that is very proud of their Haitian roots. Our roots go back to before the revolution. And so I grew up learning about the history and the tension that existed between the DR and Haiti, but also how there was political assistance that we don't often hear about after the Haitian Revolution, during the Dominican Republic's independence as well. And so when the sentencia happened in September 2013, for me, it became an opportunity to go back to sort of the motherland, where I had spent, some key moments in my formative years as a teenager down on the Haitian side, and just wanting to sort of bring my skill set as a storyteller down there to deal with a lot of the issues that I've been dealing with all along with the work that we do at Rosa Studio here in Brooklyn around looking at anti-Blackness, looking at systemic racism and how it has an impact on a very personal level. And so it was an opportunity to go down. And through the connections that I had made, I talked a little bit earlier about the earthquake and the short films that I had made and looking at Dominican and Haitian mutual aid among young people. They were the first people that I reached out to when I decided I wanted to go and do some research down there. The Dominicans of Haitian descent and Dominicans of Dominican descent who had done some work around the earthquake. And they led me to this organization called Reconocido. And I spent time with them. Reconocido is an organization run by Dominicans of Haitian descent to defend the rights of Dominicans of Haitian descent. It predates, the sentencia, because there's been a long history of discrimination against the community. And so they led me to Rosa, and I met her in one of the bateys in San Pedro de Macorís, her doing her legal assistance work, and sort of the rest is kind of history. We spent 5 years together in the making of this film.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, the making of the film itself and sort of the filmmaking techniques and sort of the desire, there's any number of approaches that you could have made the film, and a straight up documentary with, different recreations or different aspects to filmmaking. Talk about that and sort of the more like kind of magical realism elements and things like that.
Yeah. So, even before starting the film and just thinking about conceptually how I wanted to challenge myself, I was very intentional from the beginning that I wanted to take a somewhat hybrid approach to the story, that I was definitely going to lean into the skill set that I have a lot of experience in, which is the observational verite, scene work and shooting that, I had just come out of a 13-year observational film. So I definitely was going to explore that in terms of really looking at Rosa and her work and some other people in the community and really digging deep in there. But I wanted to challenge myself conceptually and through story, and also wanted to bring in the the history of the island, specifically around the genocidal massacre of 1937, but look at it from a lyrical point of view, from a magical realist legend mythology point of view, in terms of understanding how stories are also passed down through the oral tradition in our communities, how we learn about our past, and wanting to explore that in a creative way where we can learn about the violence, but that it touches us at a different level emotionally, and it becomes more about inspiration, lessons learned. Often the legends have some kind of lesson in them, embedded in them, and so the story of Moraime was birthed from that, actually from a fictionalized account of the massacre, a book called El Massacre se pasa a pie, that I read and sort of fell in love with sort of the story of Moraime, which I sort of took to another level and made it into this legend. And it is interwoven with a very kind of stark, brutal, sort of in your face verite observational scenes that Rosaides is a part of. So it's almost like the present is in conversation with the past. And at the center of that are women, are women seeking a better life, seeking liberation, both in the past and today.
Yeah, no, I love the hybrid form of the film. It really what was it like to film? I mean, some of those hidden camera, crossing those checkpoints. I mean, that must have been. I can't imagine how it's scary just to watch it.
Yes.
And to go through it.
Yeah, they were very nerve-wracking. Not so much for me. I mean, I felt very responsible for the crew and for the participants who, they did not hesitate to put on the hidden cameras. And I'm very grateful for that, because we would not have gotten a glimpse of the reality of what really happens if it were not for those hidden cameras. And they risk their lives. Our field producers, as well as the participant Rosaides and Juan Teofilo. But I feel like we could have opted the other way, bring our cameras, without being hidden. But we would not have, as we know, the camera changes everything once it's there and it's present. It is something we end up reacting to, and we adjust in different ways to that presence. And so we would not really have better understood the complexity or the depth of the hatred and the negligence that happens along the way, and the state of fear that people live in.
Well, our debt of gratitude to the producers and to them for doing that. A little bit lighter, slightly off topic, but just maybe the last month or earlier in the summer, there's sort of a pop culture moment that I feel sort of brought some of the Afro Latinx issues to mind, to public consciousness, a larger public consciousness, In the Heights, the movie In the Heights. And I was interested in hearing maybe your take around some of the conversations. I don't know if you've seen the film. I don't know how you feel about the film. But obviously for people that don't know, centered around a Dominican immigrant who maybe is very light skinned, and there was some issues with the color of the skin of a lot of the people in the film. So what was your take on sort of what happened with that film?
Well, I feel like there are a couple of things. I think what the film revealed and the choices made by those with the control and the purse strings reveals the depth of the anti-Blackness that exists within our Latinx community and the blind spots that exist as a result of it. The Washington Heights that was portrayed in this film is not the Washington Heights that I know, right? Living in New York City. It's not the Dominicans. They're not the Dominican Americans that I frequent or know who were represented in the film. And so it was a missed opportunity, right, to really complicate our narrative as Latinx folks in living in the United States. And I was, there was a level of disappointment, that's sort of a disheartening, but there's also a level of not being surprised, right? Not being surprised because we don't talk about the questions of racism that are in our communities. Like, we have white Latinx people in our community who I'm not sure where they stand, right? It's in terms of their own politics and their own convictions, right? And so when Hollywood takes this on, we have to challenge at that level in the same ways that storytelling and narratives are challenged in the Black community, are challenged in the Asian American community and stories that are told. I'm not sure whether we would ever have seen a Latinx director directing Crazy Rich Asians. I just do not imagine that, right? So I think the mistake, I don't even know if it's a mistake or how you would call it, but the egregious decision happened from the very beginning in terms of the choice of the director. And it's not to say, because people fall back, and this is the problem. This is not about a zero-sum game, right? Or a black and white game, in the sense that it's not that people can't tell stories about other communities. It's not about that. It's about, it is time to engage in justice, right? To engage in looking at representation from a lens of justice and looking at what's been told before and how do we shift that. And so it was a really a missed opportunity. Actually, there was a review of the film Stateless. I can't remember which, we were at Tribeca, and that's actually when I saw In the Heights, because it opened Tribeca, where Rosa was sort of put as a main participant and counterpoint with the lead of In the Heights, and sort of there was this dichotomy in terms of looking at the complexity of our Latinx communities, and I think that there's some very, very hard conversations that we need to have within our communities to better understand how white supremacy plays out, and just to talk about it from a larger hemispheric perspective, right? There is no place in this Western hemisphere, whether it be as far north as Canada to as far south as Argentina, where the legacy of slavery, of enslaved peoples of African descent, of genocide against indigenous peoples, of a colonial and settler heritage does not affect how we engage with each other. So we have to kind of stop and step away from this idea of Latinidad not having and thinking about our mixture being the answer, when we're actually being blinded by the fact that mejorar la raza is very much inculcated in how we see ourselves, even within our own families. And so we have to come to terms with that violent past, that violent heritage. And there's no place in this hemisphere that hasn't been touched by that. And in some ways, if we look at Stateless, Hispaniola, that island, is where it all started, right? It's the first island where Christopher Columbus landed. I mean, Christopher Columbus never set foot in the United States. And yet, his arrival has been, celebrated. I mean, I grew up partially in New York, and I know the names of the three ships that arrived in the Caribbean by Christopher Columbus, but he did arrive on Hispaniola and named it Hispaniola. And it's the first place where enslaved Africans arrived from the continent of Africa. First place where the extermination of indigenous peoples happened. I mean, the community disappeared to a large extent on that island. And our racial caste system and racial capitalism was born there and spread out. I mean, we talk about 1619 in the US, but before 1619 was 1492, and that's almost 200 years of a practice of enslavement, of slavery, of a racial caste system that we in Latin America and as descendants of Latin Americans here in the United States have still not come to terms with. So we can't hide behind the white, how white supremacy plays out in the United States and say that's not about us. You know, sorry, I sort of went off.
No, this is all. I wish we could have more time to talk about this, because I mean we've just barely scratched the surface. Like you said, this is conversation that's a long time coming. You know, centuries in the coming, when you think about it. But here in America, I feel like this is just the whole Afro-Latinx, sort of that intersection between the two, has just recently, just in the last few years, has really come to the forefront. I don't know how much of that is due to the fact that, you know, the slavery, you know, all of it, there is the connection to slavery, but slavery, the center of slavery was the Caribbean. You know, it wasn't necessarily America. You know, there were limits on the number of slaves that were brought to America. But you have, you know, Brazil and a lot of countries in South America where the number of slaves that were brought over, you know, were 4 or 5 times the number of slaves that were brought over to America. And so a lot of these issues are more prevalent or more obvious in the culture, and maybe in a lot of ways, because of the limited nature, believe it or not, the limited nature of slavery in America sort of hid a lot of those issues, and it's maybe easier in a way to sort of ignore those issues.
Well, part of it is the way, you know, the way slavery was practiced, this idea of mejorar la raza, I go back to that, I'm sorry. It's kind of the opposite of the one drop rule, right? Here in the United States, 1 drop of black, you're black. Whatever your skin color, doesn't matter, right? This is how settler colonialism was practiced by the British and their descendants, and other people who eventually took on a white identity, right? Because even that is sort of complicated in the history of the United States. And the reverse of that is what happened in our Latin American countries. It's any drop of whiteness you have gives you a little bit more privilege. And so there's that gradation where we have, I don't know how many, depending on the country, you can have hundreds of different.
There's like 16 different in some, yeah, it's.
And even within a family, it's like, I'm better than you because I got better hair, or I got the straight nose, or that kind of thing. This phenotypical thing that succeeds to divide us. That's one thing. And then 2 is we don't know our history. We don't know our history of slavery. Like Mexico Mexico City was very African at one point, right? And where did all of that go, right? Argentina had a policy of whitening its population. Brazil, you know, through their democratic race, they had this biological ideology that they would do away with Black race by miscegenation, by mixing, right? It was this opposite, but just as egregious and hard. And when we think about it, you know, Obama was not the first Black president of North America. Mexico had its Black president before that, you know, after the revolution, and we don't know about those things. And even so, there's that side of it, right? There's a side of it of how white supremacy is practiced within our Latinx communities in terms of thinking about the 1 drop of white, you know, makes you superior to another. And there were codes around that too, in terms of you being able to have more freedom. But the opposite of that is the resistance, right? We don't know about as well about, you know, Mexico's anti-slavery, you know, practices against the United States, right? Vis-a-vis the United States, where there were more, you know, forward-looking sort of visions of society, or the Maroon societies, the quilombos, the palenques that existed all over Latin America of Black resistance. They were symbols of Black resistance. And we don't know those stories either. So there's those both sides of it that are really important for us to understand the resistance of Black communities across Latin America, but understanding the intricacies and the complicated nature of how you know, this mestizaje plays out in our communities. The most rewarding the most rewarding screening that I had was with Rosa and the conversation we had with this Afro-Colombian film festival on the Pacific Coast, based in Cali, with a community of Black women, where the transformative conversations that were happening between Rosa and these women was really, really important and crucial in terms of gaining solidarity, not feeling alone or isolated, and feeling that, you know, the movement must go on. And so, yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's there's a lot of work to be done, and in better understanding our history and better understanding, you know, how these things play out for us, the color caste system, for us, and power.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you were able to have in-person screenings during this
Oh,
weird
it
time.
was, no, it was a virtual screening. I'm sorry,
Oh,
it
was it
wasn't.
virtual? Okay.
Yeah, it
I was
was a virtual. You know, it
yeah.
was very.
Have you had the opportunity to have any in-person screenings at all, or?
Yes, we had two. Tribeca, this year in June 2021. Last year was a bit of a fiasco. They basically closed down the festival, and we were supposed to have our world premiere, but it was too close to the beginning of the pandemic, so they didn't kind of get organized. But what they ended up doing is inviting all of the 2020 films who wanted to screen in person outdoors. So we had our beautiful, really world premiere outdoor screening by the beach, actually, in a sort of drive-in setup. But, you know, everybody sat on the grass with their blankets, and that was beautiful. And Rosa was there with her family, and we were really touched by that. And then we had a second in-person screening in Miami before the whole sort of Delta situation with the Third Horizon Film Festival. And I feel like, for me, I really got to understand the transformative conversations that we can have within our communities after that screening. There were some really very tense conversations around what I'm just talking about now, in terms of even our Latinx communities accepting the intricacies of how white supremacy plays out for us and what it means to be Black in the DR and beyond, and in Miami. You know, we had conversations about Juan Crow, not Jim Crow, Juan Crow in Miami, and that I was so sort of grateful that the film was able to spark those local conversations around how that plays out.
Yeah. Well, what has the movie? It's going to be on PBS, or has been on PBS. So remind me again of when it's going to play.
Yes, the film just was broadcast on PBS on the POV American documentary, and very happy about that. And then it just finished its 4-week free streaming online on the PBS platform.
Okay.
So now we're figuring out, you know, what the new releases will be like on the commercial platforms. We haven't figured that out yet, but we have a few more festivals coming down the pike, and the film will also be broadcast on Al Jazeera on their Witness series. It'll be a much shorter version, a 40-minute version that they're cutting down to be part of the series, and that's happening in October.
Okay. So if people wanted to stay up to date on the film and maybe, you know, share it with friends or family to help bring it to a larger audience, what's the best way to do that?
The best way would be to connect with Women Make Movies. They are our distributor, and they're, you know, taking charge of all of the educational and community engagement screenings, and we'll also be working with them on the commercial releases, you know, post-broadcast. So womenmakemovies.org is their website. Yeah, and, you know, I would encourage people to join our newsletter. We have a bi-monthly newsletter, radastudio.org on our website, and you could get updates on this film and on our other projects as well.
Yeah. So yeah, any updates on Rosa or everybody else in the film, or just any updates in general, sort of that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, well, Rosa Iris is based in Pittsburgh now. She requested asylum and got it. And she just recently graduated with an LLM. She got a scholarship to American University. She's doing an LLM in humanitarian and human rights law. And she's actually working and providing direct services to migrants in Pittsburgh. some of whom are Haitian, but most are from Central America, given our reality here in the Northeast. Excuse me. And so she's been doing that, kind of doing her work and staying in touch with the movement in the DR and what's happening there. Juan Teofilo unfortunately suffered 2 strokes about 1.5 years ago, and so moved back to the DR. We have actually set up a GoFundMe for him to raise money to help with his medicine and his recovery, as well as for his legal support to get his papers back. And we are actually working in partnership with an organization called Incultured Company, and they work on collaboration between Dominicans and Haitians, both in the diaspora and on the island, to sort of fight the stereotypes that exist between the 2 communities. And they do a lot of workshops, and we've done some screenings with them. But they also set up a GoFundMe campaign for the legal defense fund that exists in the DR. It's lawyers that are working to get papers back for Dominicans of Haitian descent, and that is on GoFundMe as well. Incultured Company GoFundMe campaign. We've been able to raise up to $10,000 now.
Wow.
There's a total of 20,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for everything that you're doing of bringing this conversation to the larger consciousness, conversation that needs to be had and has needed to be had for a long time. And it's at least heartening to be beginning those conversations. If anything sort of came out of In the Heights and all that stuff, is that these conversations are being held.
Yes.
So let's hope that they continue to be held, but at some point, not just conversations, but action.
Yes, absolutely.
So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
And thank you so much for having me.
And then hopefully to all the viewers, they can stay up to date on the film and do what they can to support Haiti in this time right now. So and we look forward to your future projects, which we don't have time to talk to, but I'm sure we'll be seeing those shortly, and maybe hopefully in person in Milwaukee in the years to come.
Yes, just they can find out more on our website, radastudio.org, RADA studio.org. So I look forward to staying in touch with folks.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michèle, for joining us, and thank you everyone for watching. Enjoy the rest of the CNC Fest.